Welcome to Uncorked by Archaeology Now, the Houston chapter of the Archaeological Institute of America. I'm Lucas Livingston, the creator and host of the Ancient Art Podcast and a board member of the Chicago Museum. In Uncorked, we pop the top off of the history of alcoholic beverages around the world and across the ages. In the Tiny Lectures YouTube series by Archaeology Now, archaeologist Dr. Rosemary Joyce discussed the ancient story of chocolate. Be sure to check out that episode if you haven't already done so. You'll find the link in the description of this video. There, Dr. Joyce briefly noted that the original impetus
for the domestication of chocolate at Puerto Escondido in Honduras was to create a chocolate beer, an alcoholic beverage.
Mic drop. That's what I'm going to get into here. To expand a little bit on that intriguing piece of early Mesoamerican history. The cacao tree is cultivated in tropical regions around the world today, often at substantial human and environmental expense to satisfy our insatiable first world appetite for chocolate. It's indigenous, however, only to the Americas, and only there do we find a rich history of cultivation going back thousands of years. Dr. Joyce explains how recent studies have pushed back the dates for the harvesting of cacao by many hundreds of years at multiple sites throughout the Americas. Current evidence for the earliest domestication points to the Mayo Chinchipe culture in Ecuador, at least 5,300 years ago. And from this upper Amazonian region of South America, the use of cacao likely spread through trade to Central America and Mexico much earlier than previously thought. The Maya and Olmec cultures of ancient Mexico were drinking cacao beverages nearly 4,000 years ago, and the ancient people of Puerto Escondido in present-day Honduras were drinking cacao over 3,000 years ago. This is a big deal because we so often look to later Mayan and Aztec civilizations as the progenitors of chocolate, but this is a lot like comparing apples to oranges, or, well, beer to chocolate. The famous Mayan and Aztec drink was a wonderfully frothy, bitter elixir derived from cacao beans, the primary ingredient in all the world's chocolate. Whereas the supposed chocolate beer of the early Amazonian, Mesoamerican, and Mexican cultures was completely different. Rather than using the beans or the seeds, these early cacao drinks were likely produced by fermenting the sweet pulp surrounding the beans. Calling this a chocolate beer would mislead a lot of people. This fermented drink would be nothing like the rich, dark chocolate Bach porter, stout beers, or those winter warmers. Cacao pods, or technically cherries, have an interesting architecture. The shell or the husk has 3 different woody, fibrous layers, and inside that we finally come to the white, sticky pulp encasing around 30 or 40 seeds. In the chocolate making process, the pulp encased seeds are removed from the husk, spread out, and left to ferment for a few days while the white pulp gradually liquefies and drips off the seeds. That fermented pulp juice is simply a byproduct in today's chocolate production, although this is an absolutely crucial step in the process to condition the seeds before roasting. In our very early cacao beer, it was the fermented pulp that was collected, while the seeds seem not to have played a role in the beverage. That's an interesting historic role reversal, going from drinking the fermented pulp to drinking the fermented, roasted, and ground seeds. So the fermentation step was never forgotten, which begs the question of whether people continued to produce cacao beer even when chocolate became the food of the gods. In fact, ethnographic and ethnohistoric sources document modern South American traditions of fermenting cacao pulp into an alcoholic beverage. In the present day, many indigenous peoples of Ecuador drink cacao pulp as a fresh juice or fermented into an alcoholic beverage, used in rituals and celebrations. And in very recent years, we've even seen the emergence of a commercial distilled spirit made from cacao pulp. In an earlier episode of Uncorked, Brewing in the Andes, we looked at chicha, the corn beer of the Peruvian Andes. Unlike with the stubborn starch in corn, no chewing and spitting is required to get cacao pulp to ferment. The plant itself has already helpfully converted its starch into fermentable sugar in a process we generally take for granted called ripening. And then nature's yeast all around us turns the sugar into alcohol. As a human animal, I can't help but dwell a bit on the classification of this alcoholic cacao beverage. Is it a beer? Because it's a low alcohol fermented drink? Or more properly, an ale because it doesn't have any hops? Or should we call it wine because it derives from natural fruit sugars instead of requiring intervention on our part to convert the starch into sugar? Should we even be imposing these traditionally Eurocentric distinctions on an indigenous American cultural product? Food for thought. Well, if it starts to show up on our liquor store shelves, then in the US at least, we'll just let the FDA and lobbyists sort all that out. It does seem to me, though, that this fermented cacao drink does fit nicely into a family of other similar indigenous American alcoholic beverages, like tiswin, from fruit of the saguaro cactus, a traditional drink of the Tohono O'odham Nation of the Sonoran Desert region, and pulque, a thick, milky white fermented drink made from agave sap in Mexico and Central America. And I think it's fantastic that through archaeology, we can now include cacao in the roster of ancient alcohols and push back brewing in the Americas almost to the time when, on the other side of the world, the pyramids of Egypt were the new kids on the block. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Uncorked. And be sure to subscribe on YouTube and check out all the other original video content from Archaeology Now.